There was an IBM report a few years ago. It said that one of the top things millennials look for in a job is the ability to work with a diverse group of people. So, obviously we care a lot about diversity, inclusion, working with people who have different backgrounds, different ages, different perspectives, industry hires, interns, etc. So I think people matters so much to us.
Welcome to the Modern Selling Podcast, where we help the entire sales community to create more sales conversations with today's modern buyer. This includes anyone from entrepreneurs and business owners to sales reps and sales leaders. Each episode, you will hear from sales leaders, practitioners, and influencers to help you find, engage, connect, and nurture your relationships with your buyers. I'm Mario Martinez Jr., your host, and you're now listening to the Modern Selling Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, Mario Martinez Jr., and I'm here on the Modern Selling Podcast, and we are in fact broadcasting live right now to the Modern Selling Podcast Facebook page. I've got with me a guest, and I'm excited. It's another female. That's right. I've been making a very concerted effort to bring on more women in sales and people of diverse backgrounds, color included. And so with me, I've got Rakhi Voria, and she is with me from New York, right, Rakhi?
Normally, yes. Currently quarantining in Colorado.
Quarantining in Colorado. All right. So she is the director of IBM Global Digital Sales Development, and we've got some great topics. Rakhi, say hello to everybody.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me on the show, Mario.
You bet. Now, as customary, for my late afternoon podcast, either we're having a drink or we're having dessert. And for all of you who are watching it right now, you can't see. Let's see. Hold on. Wait. I gotta get closer. There it goes. My cheesecake, my green screen effect is messing up. But I just have two pieces. I have two pieces of cheesecake, Rakhi.
That's you.
It was a long day today. I had to go with two pieces of cheesecake. And for all my listeners, well, when you listen to this, just know that I had two pieces of cheesecake, and it was a long day. So excited to be here with you, Rakhi. We've got listeners that are sales leaders, sales reps, marketing leaders, sales enablement folks that all listen into the Modern Selling Podcast. And we've got some really awesome topics to talk about today: diversity, millennials, and even how we might be changing our business and the way we go to market for sales. So do me a favor, just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background. And then I have a very important yet special question that I want to know something about you. So we'll get to that one in just a minute. So tell us a little bit about you.
Sounds intriguing. All right. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you again for having me. I manage a global team that's responsible for the strategy, implementation, and revenue of the digital sales development function at IBM. So within this function, we have a few hundred digital development reps, business development reps. They're focused on client progression, deal progression, and also closure of select deals. So I've been at IBM for just over a year now. I was previously at Microsoft, where I spent about 6.5 years across a variety of different roles at the company. Sales was always the common thread, but the last role that I had at Microsoft was I helped them to build their inside or digital sales team as the chief of staff to the corporate vice president for worldwide inside sales. So I was one of the first employees on the team. We hired about 2,000 people in under 3 years. So really massive growth, learned a lot. And I'm also very passionate about advancing women in business and in sales in particular as a function. I have the pleasure of serving as the executive co-chair of the Women at IBM group in New York City. And I'm always trying to find ways to figure out how we can attract, retain, and advance women in business and also in my profession in sales. So great to be here today.
I love it. So, I don't know if you know this, but I am actually the first and only male and Latino male at that, that is on the advisory board of the National Association of Women Sales Professionals. So women in sales, as is Latinos in sales, is near and dear to my heart because we have a very underrepresented group and organization. I mean, I'm a community, not organization, community within our organizations globally. And that needs to change. It really does. And we need to become very intentional about some of the things that we do to be able to create that diverse approach. And we're going to spend some time talking about that. But before we do, here it is. I got a question for you, Rakhi. I'm looking for something juicy. I want something juicy. You got to give it to me. Let's see. Tell us something nobody knows about you, even if they were to look at your social profiles. Give me something juicy. As you know, you've listened to my show. We've got everything from extra appendage to illegal poker rings to someone is an avid cannabis smoker. And we have something down to, I have 2 kids and a dog. So you tell me what it is that something's interesting about you.
All right, I'll give you something a little bit in the middle. I'll give you 2, in fact. I'm feeling generous today.
Ooh, I love it.
Okay, so the first one, I'm a trained Indian classical dancer. So I took a Kathak dance for over a decade. My mom was a teacher. So yeah, that's, I come from Indian background and heritage. So
wow,
something most people don't know about me. And another one, slightly gross for those of you who are watching, is I have double jointed elbows.
What do you mean by that? Wait. Oh! I'm sorry, I didn't mean to respond that way.
I know. Again. Show it. Who didn't get a chance to actually see is probably just going to be wondering what the heck is going on. Isn't it weird? I know.
So for those who are audibly listening to this, I just you can't see on live video right now, but Facebookers, you can see it. Essentially, she's I guess hyperextending your arm out, the way I describe it, and as she hyperextends her arm out, her elbow comes up. I think I don't even know how to describe it. Yeah. It feels like it hurts. I love it. All right, that's a good one. I like that one, Rakhi, because no one's ever
remember me forever, Mario.
Yeah, exactly. No one's ever said, "Look at this." That's a pretty good one. I like it. Well, all right, we got 2 things. So on the dance part, you were repeat that one more time. A technical Indian dancer.
An Indian classical dancer. So the type of dance is called Kathak.
Kathak?
Kathak, Kathak.
Kathak. Oh, okay. Yeah. Very interesting. I've never heard. And is that more like a ballroom?
No, it's definitely not ballroom. It's not Bollywood. It's more traditional. So oftentimes you're telling stories about ancient history and past and everything through the art form. So yeah.
Interesting. Very cool. All right. Well, there you go. I did not know that. And I don't think I figured that out from any of your social profiles. That was a good one. Excellent. All right. Well, let's get into some meat and potatoes here. And I want to start out with talking about millennials. There are definitely some common views and misconceptions about millennials. And I know you've written some articles, I think in Forbes, if I'm not mistaken, on what companies can do to attract millennials. I know here for our organization, 53% of our company, and we have a small business, but represent the millennials, and then it's everybody else, Gen X and baby boomers. So it's about right, about 50% of the workforce, as they say worldwide, is millennials. And here we are, 53% of our workforce are millennials. But one thing I do find when trying to attract millennials is that they have a very interesting perspective sometimes when it comes to the recruitment process. And it can make it very difficult for those of us that have kind of like that old school style of how to, properly recruit them. So I'm very curious. This is something that sales leaders are dealing with right now. Can you share some of your suggestions, the things that you've written about or talked about on what we can do to attract millennials?
Yes, I'm happy to share that. And for those of you who can't see me, I guess I should probably mention that I'm a millennial myself. And so hopefully I have a little bit of credibility when I'm talking about this. But I think this has been a really hot topic over the years, especially because, obviously the majority of the workforce is now millennial, including your own. So I think there are a lot of preconceived notions about what millennials care for, and companies almost over-rotate to those things. So people just assume that all millennials want to work in environments where you have free snacks and bean bags and nap pods and all of those types of things. Don't get me wrong, I would love those, but actually a lot of the studies show that that's actually pretty low on the list of priorities when it comes to millennials. So I would boil it down to probably 3 specific things that I've noticed from my own personal experience and from also hiring a lot of fellow millennials. And the first one is we care a lot about people. sometimes more than the actual work itself. So there was an IBM report a few years ago. It said that one of the top things millennials look for in a job is the ability to work with a diverse group of people. So, obviously we care a lot about diversity, inclusion, working with people who have different backgrounds, different ages, different perspectives, industry hires, interns, etc. So I think people matters so much to us. And then the second one is really variety and experiences. I mean, we oftentimes are referred to as the job hopping generation for a reason. And it's because we want to differentiate our experiences. We want to take on horizontal challenges while still growing vertically. And so I encourage companies to think about how can you invest in rotational programs or opportunities to give millennials the chance to build different skill sets across different functions. We're very different from the previous generation in that we want to be able to try marketing, sales, finance, et cetera. We don't necessarily have as much of a linear path like maybe our parents might have or our grandparents. So experiences and getting a chance to try new things, travel is something that's really important to us. Those things really go a long way. And then finally is around flexibility. So this one probably won't be surprising, but many people have read the Deloitte Millennial Study. And it shows that 75% of millennials actually want the ability to work from home or somewhere other than their office. And in most markets, the study found that that was more important to people than even career progression. So we care more about flexibility than even getting a promotion, which might be surprising to some people. But especially in the environment that we are currently in with the global pandemic, I think that flexibility is really speaking to a lot of millennials. So those are some of the things that I would suggest to companies thinking about attracting more millennials into their organizations.
I like it. So care about people, variety and experience, and flexibility. I want to touch on that flexibility point for a second here. Why do you think that millennials care more about flexibility and working from wherever than their career progression? Like, because he flipped that around and talk about Gen Xers or boomers, and it was all about vertical promotions, right? How am I going to climb the corporate ladder? Why is it not like that for millennials?
I would say it's not either or. We are definitely ambitious and we have a lot of desire to obviously progress in our career. In fact, many people say that millennials are frustrating because we are often getting ahead of ourselves and have certain expectations of getting promotions and things like that a little bit more aggressively than what people might deserve. So I don't think it's an either or, but I just think flexibility is important to people because nowadays we have the technology to make it possible, right? So we can, some people actually, some millennials say that they're more productive when they're working in places other than the office. And I know that's something that companies are really concerned about. They think, well, if I let my employees work from home or maybe work from Hawaii for the week or whatever it might be, they're not going to be putting in as much. But a lot of millennials would say, and in fact, the studies would say that we are more productive when we have the ability to work in a place that's more comfortable than a typical cubicle environment, because not all companies are like tech, like IBM and Google and all of these that have really fun, exciting, colorful offices. Some of them are deemed to be what some consider to be pretty old school.
Yeah. So funny you mentioned that because that's actually one of the reasons why we launched a 100% virtual company. One, because of our DNA, which is we teach digital sales training. Hello. And the other piece is as it relates to being able to find talent anywhere in the world, and allow them to be able to have as much enjoyment as they possibly want, no matter where they went. So we've got folks in Colombia, we have folks in France right now, we've got folks in India, we've got folks in Hawaii. So I don't care where you work. I just care about you getting the job done. And that's super important. And then, oh, by the way, don't get it twisted. I know that we get more productivity by allowing someone to work from home and have their own home office than them spending 7 hours at the office, 1 hour on a commute in the morning, 1 hour on the commute in the afternoon, and then they're out and about with friends and family and whatever they might be doing. When you work from home, essentially you get more productivity because it only takes you 5 minutes for your commute. And in addition to that, when there's an urgent issue, an urgent email, guess what you just go and do? you go handle it. And so oftentimes you don't have those types of delays. Now, that's, I think, one of the challenges for most people is when working from home, whether you're a millennial or not, is that work-life balance. And that becomes very difficult. But I have absolutely seen much more productivity as a result of having people work from home wherever they may want to go.
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at the past few months of most of us being in quarantine and working from home. I mean, most people have been putting in way more hours than they typically would when they're in the office. So I totally agree with that. But I think the other common thing that people think of is when millennials, when we say we want flexibility, they sort of equate that to working from home, but it's beyond that. I think it's just flexibility in how, where, and when you do your work. So, many people are now on global teams, for example. So if you have a 5 a.m. call, maybe it's okay to take a couple of hours in the afternoon to do whatever you need to do, log back on at night, et cetera. So I think flexibility also spans across just the ability to work from any place, anywhere, not being confined to a 9 to 5 desk, and also even flexibility in things like travel, as an example. So for me, I've had the fortunate pleasure of being able to travel the world with both Microsoft and IBM. And one of the things that has been so memorable for me is adding personal trips to some of those work travels. So if I'm going somewhere new that I've never been, I probably won't be going back anytime soon. I love working for companies that give me the flexibility to stay the weekend or a few extra days or whatever it might be. Of course, you're doing it on your own dime, but it's an opportunity to be able to combine personal with professional and really get some of those experiences that you want to have at a young age.
Well, that goes right back to your point number 2 of variety and experience,
Yep.
right? It segues really nicely into, talking about that, which is, I think oftentimes folks that are my generation and older, we think of, if you want new responsibilities, we have to promote you. We actually have to give you a new role. We have to train you on something. As opposed to, you may be in role X, but it doesn't mean that I can't give you new assignments, new challenges, new concepts to be able to work on. Case in point, we have our sales coordinator who's really responsible for tools, technologies, supporting the sales folks, helping with a lot of the reporting, a lot of the administrative type of stuff. But in this case, Danny has indicated that he wants to have greater responsibility. And we know that he's a YouTuber. So in this case, what we started doing was we started saying, all right, since we know that you know how to produce content and you've got a several 100,000 person following, we're going to have you help us as part of the sales enablement side and help us with thinking about content production and how we roll content out to the sales force, and add on these new elements to your job if you want them, so that you can actually get that experience on the sales enablement and the operation side of the house. But we didn't change holistically his job. We said, do you want these added responsibilities to be able to have this experience, to be able to get that type, built onto your resume? And of course, he says, yes, absolutely. So it could be something as simple as that in terms of new responsibilities that an individual can go after. So I think that's really important, that leaders just understand a variety and experience doesn't mean that you have to change jobs. It means that you could give them something different. Do you agree with that?
I totally agree. And as I reflect on my own personal career, if you just looked at my resume on paper, it would actually show that I've had 6 jobs in 8 years.
Oh.
But it was actually only across 4 different teams. So 2 of those opportunities just ended up becoming expanded responsibilities. So I didn't leave the team. I had leveraged all of the things that I had learned in my first year. And then as I moved into the second year, I had taken on different scope or different responsibility. And that kept me there for longer than I maybe would have wanted to stay, because I was still being challenged. I was having a chance to deliver even greater impact. And so one of those instances, I was working in the Microsoft financing division, and I was responsible for business development for the North America enterprise team. And I had had many conversations with my manager about how I had wanted to get a little bit of a taste of international. At the time, I had never had a global role. It was all pretty domestic at the time. And so I said, that's a skill set I want to build, and I want to see how different parts of the world conduct business. And so I worked with her, and basically after a year, we expanded my role to be the business development manager for the Americas. So I covered North and South America. And then instead of just enterprise, I covered all segments. So commercial, corporate, public sector, enterprise, et cetera. So That I always share that experience with many people that I mentor, because if you're ready for something new, you kind of owe it to your team to at least articulate what some of those experiences are that you want to have, and the skills you want to build, and the competencies that you want to build as well, before you just decide, okay, I'm done with this, it's time to jump ship.
Yeah, well, and that goes right into one of the questions that I wanted to talk to you about, was really, tips for millennials who may be watching, maybe struggling to navigate their own careers. I think you just hit the nail on the head. Like, you got to have a voice, and you got to be able to articulate what you might want, not be frustrated by what you're not getting, because if you're not talking about it, then nobody really knows, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, so to answer your question, I think I would suggest a few different things to millennials who are trying to navigate the career journey. And the first one is, it's important to be regimented about it, but also not to over-engineer it. And I see so many people who are thinking, this is the next job that I want. And they choose a specific job and they put all of their sights on it. And it closes them off to so many other possibilities. And when you're that early in your career, you probably don't know what you really want to do. And so it's more important for me, I've learned over years, to share what some of those big buckets are, the experiences I wanted to have. I feel like we've said that word about 20 times now, but I think that really is what it comes down to. And for me, at times in my career, it was really high level. It wasn't very specific. I had told a mentor or a manager, for my next job, I really wanted to be part of a global division. I've never had that opportunity, not married yet, don't have kids, have the ability to travel the world. So that's really important to me. I had said I want to be part of a team that's growing, because I had been on kind of well-oiled engines, and so wanted to be part of an incubation part of the organization, so that as it grew, I could maybe grow with it. And that's actually what led me to that inside sales team at Microsoft, where I said we had hired 2,000 people. And even though it was just two very high level things that I had articulated, there were people around me who had encouraged me to go in that direction. It's a team I didn't even know about because it didn't exist at the time. It's not an area of the company I would have ever naturally considered, and I didn't even know anybody over there. So I think it's so important to, even though you might have some short-term goals, long-term goals, craft it around just the skills that you want to have versus the actual job that you want to get. Because once again, it's not a very linear path. And then the other thing I would say to millennials is just leverage the qualities that make you unique. I mean, there were so many times early in my career where I had imposter syndrome, and I was sitting at tables with people who had far more experience than me, many of which were men. I was young, I was female, I was diverse. And so I had all of these things. And I think what helped me be successful is I used all of those things to my advantage. I basically said, I am young, I am a millennial, so maybe I can push some of these people to think a little bit differently, to invent new processes, to innovate, to push the needle. I've been doing that here at IBM as well as a newbie. And so I think all of those things, if you're listening and you're a millennial, and sometimes you might feel like, do I have the experience to really be here? Someone somewhere believed in you, which is why you are there. And now you've got to use all of those skills that you have and those qualities that make you who you are to really move a business forward.
And would you suggest that that's a conversation happening with your manager, or with your manager's manager, or manager's manager's manager? Where do you start and where do you stop at?
All of the above. So I think that's one of the things that has helped me. I guess I've really been relentless about reaching out to people. Maybe it's the salesperson in me, but I think sometimes people feel that networking is a bad thing. And if you use it in the right way and you're genuinely curious and you genuinely just want to learn, it could be extremely advantageous for your career. So I think it's important to not only foster a good relationship with your manager where you're having some of those open conversations, but also with your peers. You got to look up, you got to look down, you got to look across. So don't always just focus on what's above, but also focus on who are some of your peers, who are some of your boss's peers, who are your skip levels. And don't be afraid to reach out to them. And, especially when you're new, as I said, I just joined IBM a year ago. When I first got here, I probably made a list of 100 people that I needed to meet with in the first quarter. And
wow.
Some of it was people who needed to help me with my job, so functional knowledge, and some of it was people that I had just heard of, people who I had really admired, who I had seen from afar, maybe who had a shared passion around advancing women or women in sales or things like that. And I kind of cold called them. I just sent them a note and I said, hi, I wanted to introduce myself. I'm new to the company. Seems like you've navigated through your career well. Would you mind if I set up some time to learn a little bit more about your background and team and pick your brain as I integrate and onboard? And I don't think there was anybody who said no. So the onus is on us to make sure that we are engaging with as many people as possible, because you never know when those are going to lead to future opportunities down the line.
Wow. And so as you did that cross-function within your leadership team, you didn't have anybody within your leadership chain that say, hey, don't start calling around and skipping around, like work through the chain of command.
No, I've been fortunate in that way that leadership wasn't really like that at both of the companies that I've worked at. But I think you got to be careful about it, right? Because you don't want to be viewed as a person who's just trying to network. All they care about is themselves. So if you frame it around curiosity, as I said, and wanting to learn something specific versus I just want to get my name out there, I don't think anybody can fault you for wanting to grow and to learn and to see how you can connect dots. And what's also most important is making sure you continue all of that. And so now that I've been here at IBM for about a year, I'm actually circling back with many of those people. And just because you reach out to someone doesn't mean that they have to be your mentor. It doesn't mean you have to continue a monthly sync or quarterly or whatever. Some of these people I literally haven't talked to in a year. And I'm just circling back and I'm saying, I've been here for a year. I have some time under my belt. I would love to reconnect and share about my experience and pick your brain now, as I've been here for a year and continuing on that next step. So I think it's important to also be a little bit organized about your networking too, and maybe keep track of the people that you're meeting with and the ones that you really clicked with so you can circle back.
It sounds to me like you've got a kind of a formula. And it would be really great if you haven't written the formula yet, and kind of a process and, steps and what do you say, those types of things. I think it'd be a great blog post for the Vengreso blog. And if you want to do it, we'll be happy to blow it up. As you know, we're pretty prolific on social. So
funny. I've never even thought about it as a formula, but now that you say it, it kind of is. So
it is a formula. Yeah. It's very, we'd love to have you as a guest blogger. And I think it's an interesting approach because, someone like myself, when I was coming in, we didn't do that because there was a hierarchy and there was a process and there was a flow, and people, based upon your performance, people would talk about you and throw your name in the hat, which is the reason that it's created a primarily white male-dominated sales environment. Let's just call a spade a spade. That's exactly what happened. And so as a result of what you're talking about, whether you're Latino, you're Black, you're white, whatever, it doesn't really matter. You're now coming at this from an idea from curiosity, from knowledge, networking, and it's a different way to be able to really approach those that are in higher positions. And even what you said in terms of what you might say to somebody, and then the follow through and what you have happen. Because as soon as you said that, I was thinking, God, does that mean you're going to have like 100 different mentors? That's the way I thought of it, right? But to your point, it doesn't have to be a mentor. It's a networking opportunity. And so what you've basically done is you took a globally dispersed workforce and you created your own private little, network.
Right. And like I said, you almost have to check yourself. So if you're only reaching out to the big wigs in the company, there's probably something hidden behind what you're trying to accomplish. But if you're reaching out to people up, down, and across, then it kind of, it shows that you really want to learn. And so in that list of 100 people or whatever, many of those were people who were technically lower than me from a level perspective or whatever, but they had been at IBM for a long time. I learned so much from them. And now, I'm helping to mentor them and vice versa. It's kind of a reverse mentoring type of thing that tends to happen. So you just got to think about what you're looking to get out of it. And most importantly, what you can also give back to people. Because I'll tell you, I would say probably many of the people who agreed to meet with me is also because they wanted to learn a little bit more about my previous experience. And they wanted to understand, what are some of my insights as a new person coming into IBM? What are the things that we should be doing differently based on what's going on in the industry? So I think if every conversation you go in thinking about what can I give back, then it's going to be a more fruitful discussion for everybody.
So you mentioned the word a couple times, and I think what you're doing right now is you're giving us a formula, but it's also training. It's training for those millennials who and leaders such as myself that may have a predisposition or not or thought on, oh geez, how do I manage this guy? How do I manage this gal? Right? Oh, they're always trying to move around. Oh, they just can't be content. Right? We've heard them all. So let's talk about a little bit about some of the training approaches for millennial sellers, because I think it's a fairly hot topic. What do you think is the best way to train millennials, and what have you seen stick?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think the first thing is you have to tell them what they need to know up front, including how they're going to be measured. I mean, we are the technology generation, right? Like, we don't have as much of a strong attention span as maybe people in previous generations. And so anytime you're training a millennial, I think it's really important to just be really upfront about, here are the top 3 things you need to take away from this 1 hour long training. Here's what we're going to tell you. And by the way, at the end, here's what we told you. So you almost need to keep it relatively high level, and then also make sure that they're clear on what the outcomes need to be. So super clear about what measurements are going to look like. I mean, we are an ambitious generation. We want to make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. And so to know upfront what some of those things are is really helpful. Another suggestion is, I think, providing praise and coaching and feedback along the way. That is something that has really helped me. And I see a lot of millennials, especially in my organization, they want frequent, specific, strategic feedback, and they want to know how are they doing, not in general, but in comparison to their peers. They want specific pieces of feedback so they can actually develop and grow. So I think that the onus is on leaders and managers to really provide that on a regular basis. And then finally, I mean, we got to keep it tech savvy, right? So education and technology, I think, go hand in hand. If we can't offer trainings that can be accessed from anywhere, if you can only do it when you're on premises at your organization, that's not great. If you can't do it on your phone, that's not great. I went on a walk with my mom the other day, and I listened to an all hands call training that I had to miss during the day. And so just being able to have that flexibility to do it on my phone as a millennial, that was very helpful for me. And I think, frankly, everybody, not just millennials.
Well, in the world that we live in, post-COVID, pretty much you'll be obsolete if you don't have that virtual mindset. And I think a lot of companies are realizing that, and especially a lot of new policies have come out and are still forthcoming of companies saying, all right, if you don't want to come to the office, you can work full-time from home, right? That's totally up to you. And that is a great new environment that requires training to be virtualized. In this case, virtual sales training. Very interesting. So leverage technology, educate, praise along the way, provide feedback about how they're doing, and make sure you're really, working towards those elements. And what I will say is that as soon as you said praise and coaching and feedback along the way, I just scratched my head thinking, oftentimes when something gets to my level, it's a problem. Most generally, right? And so generally when you see me engage, it's because I'm addressing a problem, as opposed to like, wait, why don't I see the really great stuff? How come we don't talk about the great stuff so that I can actually acknowledge that? And I would hate to be the recipient. Every time you see an email come across from me, it's like, there's a problem. Well, what about the great stuff? So that we can mix some of that stuff inside there. And I think that's something that we have to do a better job at as well. Because, I may be isolated to some of the great things that are happening, but I'm only hearing about the individual problems that we see. Right.
Yeah.
So
got to celebrate the wins.
Yeah, exactly. That definitely makes me rethink my strategy here. And now I want to talk about something that's near and dear to your heart as well as mine. And I know you're very passionate about diversity in sales, partly because of your own story. So first off, tell us a little bit about how you first got into sales.
Well, I fell into sales. I've told this story many times, so anybody who knows me has probably heard it. But basically, when I was applying to work at Microsoft, I had applied for a marketing position because I had some advertising agency experience. So I thought that would make a good entryway into the company. So I had applied for marketing, and it was actually the recruiter who put me in the queue for sales. And I remember I was having a call with her, and she said, have you ever considered sales? I think you'd be a great fit for it. You listen well, you communicate effectively, you have a strong track record of success. All of those things would make you a really great fit for sales. And at the time, I just had this reaction to her and I was like, oh my gosh, I would never go into sales. It's so masculine. I don't have the personality for it. Seems so competitive, aggressive, not my scene. But I really liked Microsoft, and honestly, I just kind of went with it and ended up in a licensing sales specialist role. So didn't know what that was, didn't sound particularly sexy, but I liked Microsoft, as I said. So I ended up in that role, and I ended up loving it. The recruiter was right. I was actually really good at sales. I was learning a lot of really tangible skills, and I was really enjoying my time in that role. And fast forward, it's actually why I'm so passionate about getting more women into sales, because I think from my own story, I had so many preconceived notions about the profession, and I don't think companies are doing a great enough job to help dispel some of those myths. And we have to make some progress there. But, as you know now, I write about it, I talk about it, I've published articles on why we need more women in sales, why women should consider roles in sales. And so I'm happy to be fighting that fight, but I think we need the help of our male counterparts, which is why it's so wonderful that you're involved with Cynthia Barnes's NAWSP organization to really help shed light on the topic. Because unfortunately, we hear a lot about getting more women into STEM careers, but we pretty rarely hear about women in sales, even though according to CEB Global, it actually has the second largest gender equity gap across all business functions after supply chain. And I think, basically, if you look at the statistics, only 39% of people in sales are women. The higher up you get, the worse it gets. So only 1 in 5 vice presidents of sales of women. So the numbers are actually pretty bad. They haven't actually gotten much better over the past decade. So it's really up to us to bring light to this important topic and to make a difference here.
Interesting. So when you told the recruiter, never thought about it, not really, kind of masculine, what did the recruiter say? By the way, was the recruiter male or female?
She was a female.
Okay. When you told her that, what was the response? And then how did you end up there? Especially since you were like, no, that doesn't make sense.
She said, why don't you just meet with a few people and then we can regroup? And so it was honestly the people who really attracted me to the profession. So I had the opportunity to meet with someone who was the director of the licensing sales team. His name was Ray Connor. And he was just so passionate about sales, so passionate about Microsoft. He had been there for so long. And he found a way to make licensing seem fun, which, let me tell you, is really hard to do. And so I just sort of fell in love with the people that I had a chance to meet with. And I kind of thought, all of these people have gone on and done so many different things with their career. And I sort of had this view. I didn't really know. Microsoft was my first job straight out of graduate school. So it was the first company that I really had worked at. And I just didn't want to box myself in. And I thought, well, if I start as a seller, then I'll be a sales manager, then I'll be a VP of sales, and it's going to be this never-ending cycle. That is absolutely not the case in today's day and age, especially at big corporations where you can move up and down and across. And so seeing some of their paths and the fact that even though they started in sales, they've been able to do so many different things with it is what really attracted me to it. And as I think about my own career, it's been a long time since I've been in a direct customer facing role. I had moved into business development, supporting a financing team, as I mentioned. Then I helped build a digital sales team. Now I'm helping to optimize one, and it's more sales strategy and transformation. So sales has been the common thread throughout my career, but it's been a good learning for me and hopefully for others who have had a chance to hear my story, that there is really no singular path in sales.
Yeah. You mentioned 39% of individuals in sales are actually women.
Yep.
It's gone up a little bit in the last couple of years. A few years ago, we were at about a third, 33%. So it's gotten some rise, I think, because of some visibility. But it goes down significantly more when you look at management. And I think the number is 13%, if I'm not mistaken. You said 1 in 5 are vice presidents, but 13% are in a management position and above. And I'll highlight that if you add on women of color or even men of color, Latinos, African-American, whatever it might be, that number is even smaller than just women in sales in general, right? So it's super, super, super important to be focused on this particular issue and to create some really intentional moves. And the reason why I was asking about why did the recruiter say like, well, let's do this. I just wonder, and I don't know if you ever had a chance to ask the recruiter, was this position something that she was really focused on trying to find women for and becoming intentional, or was because she was like, I see a lot of candidates come through and she is probably, a really darn good candidate for this particular role. Like, was the move to to move you in that direction, was that intentional?
Yeah, I have asked her actually. She's no longer a recruiter at Microsoft, but I did have a chance to ask her because at a certain point I circled back with her and I thanked her for pushing me in a direction that I would not have normally naturally considered if it wasn't for her.
Sure.
And I asked her, I kind of said, what did you see in me that made you think I would be a good fit for sales? And, she basically said, well, you sold yourself so effectively to me and you personalized it in a way that I hadn't seen in a long time. And I said, What are you talking about? And she reminded me of this example that I had shared in my interview, which I didn't even remember at the time, but she had asked me a little bit about why Microsoft. And I said, Microsoft had been something that had been part of my life really growing up. And I had touched and felt the tools and technology throughout my life, but I told her a specific story. I said, I grew up with a single mom and two older sisters, and my mom at one point was working 3 jobs. And I remember studying for the spelling bee because I'm Indian. That's what we do. Apparently it's like our Indian Super Bowl. And there wasn't really anybody to practice with me because my mom was working so much at that time. And so the way that I would practice is I would type the words on Microsoft Word. And it was spell check that would tell me if I was spelling them right or wrong. And I had told that story and it just really hit home for her. And she was like, oh my gosh, you just sold Microsoft to me. And I wasn't even trying to, which is why I think it was so genuine and authentic to her. But she was just like, for someone to be able to share their own personal experience from a young age and what the company has meant to them over the course of many years, I just thought that you would be great at telling that Microsoft story to our clients. And so that's how I ended up in sales, I guess.
I love it. Why do you think we have so few women in sales then? What do you think is the reason behind that?
I think there's a lot of different reasons. I mean, the main one is the one that I mentioned about my own personal journey. We have a lot of preconceived notions about the profession. There's a lot of negative connotations, unfortunately, associated with sales even today. I'm not sure if any of the listeners have read the book by Dan Pink. It's called To Sell is Human.
Yeah.
He had asked people, what do you think of when you hear the word sales? And most of the words were pushy, annoying, aggressive. There are all these words that basically no woman or even man would want to be associated with, frankly. So there is still a stigma, I think, where people think of someone who's just hungry to do whatever it takes to close the deal versus someone who's demonstrating empathy and asking questions and really wanting to co-create a solution and all of that. And I think, unfortunately, the recruiting process is not where it needs to be. So if you look at some of the job descriptions in the industry, they're still quite male dominated. And you have to be really intentional about redlining every single job description that you have, making sure you don't have words that might be a turnoff to certain women or even diverse candidates in general. So I sometimes see job descriptions, even today, that say that they're looking for people with a competitive sports background. I mean, come on, like I personally do not have a competitive sports background. Many women might see that on a job description and they might think, okay, this is obviously not the environment for me. And unfortunately, we already know, I mean, there's numerous studies. Everyone's heard of the Hewlett-Packard study from several years ago that basically said women only apply for roles when they meet 100% of the qualifications, whereas men apply where they meet 60%. Yep. So every single thing, unfortunately, women, first of all, we need to get better at this, but we hold ourselves back when we see certain things on job descriptions that just might not fit the type of personality or background that we have. So it's really important for customers to be, or for companies to be super intentional about that.
Yeah, and that's very true. Just generally speaking, if you look at something, you're like, oh, I can't do that. Whereas I've definitely been there in those scenarios where we've had men versus women, not men versus women, but we've had men and women, and you see the women say, no, that you can't, we can't make a move. We can't do that. And the guys are like, come on, let's do it. We got enough information. Like, let's just jump into it. And so I think a big responsibility rests on women willing to take calculated risk, but at the same time, you've got to have the organizations who are, as in your story, being very intentional in the things that they're doing in terms of, if I know that I have a problem with diversity in sales, women, color, whatever it may be, then I need to apply a solution for it, which is I'm going to look for people of color. And the one thing that always bothers me is, especially because I used to work in a Fortune 100, and it would be, this role is identified as a role that should be diverse. So really look for that diverse candidate. And then you ask them, like, what does that mean? Am I looking for someone that's like not white and not male? Well, no, you look for the best person for the job. Okay, no. Wait, you're talking out of your butt. So hold on. This is identified as a diverse role, but now you're telling me just look for the best person for the job. So is it a role that I should be looking for diversity, or is it a role I should be looking for the best person on the job? Well, always look for the best person. But if you happen to find somebody, well, then that's not a role that's tagged or identified as something that we should be filling for a diversity requirement. No. And of course, big companies, they always want to protect themselves, particularly because they don't want to have reverse discrimination lawsuits. And at some point, we have to get out of this mold and this thinking that we're going to have reverse discrimination lawsuits. But why is it wrong to say, you know what? Our workforce only has 13% women in the sales leadership ranks. Our workforce only has 5% African-American in the sales leadership ranks. Our workforce only has 1.3% of Latinos in the leadership ranks. We need to make that change. Guess what? All new hires going forward are going to be either women, Black, or Latinos, or you fill in the blank, right? It doesn't have to be that. I'm Hispanic. So, and you're a woman. So I think that it just requires us to be more intentional. And if the company has to assume some risk, then go for it. Bring the risk on, because that's the only way you're going to be able to make change, in my opinion, is to be intentional about what you do and how you go about approaching the marketplace. And I've been very clear in the way we do recruiting. If I could build an entire company of those of Latin descent, I absolutely would do that. And I'm okay with that. And by the way, we used to have greater than 50% of our organization was women. Now it's around 40%. But we used to have, because I was very intentional. When we started our company, I said 50% of our company ownership has to be as a direct result of being a diverse workforce. So we've got to have women, we got to have people of color, and we've got our CMO, he's Cuban, we've got myself, Hispanic, and we've got our CVO, Vivica Von Rosen, who's a female. Guess what? We hit the mark. Right? So we were very intentional. And I think that's one of the big problems that we see out there is companies have not really focused on that diversity. So my question to you is, how can companies increase diversity in the sales forces, especially for women, of course, which is a passion of yours?
Well, the first thing is, I think you have to treat it like any other business objective, with KPIs and goals and measurement systems, almost in the way that you just described. You have to make it a core part of your leadership's performance, with actual measurements, with reviews, with get to green plans, wherever you're in the red zone, just like sales, just like finance, just like any other part of the organization. So I think, the second you can make it a business metric, then people can actually work towards something. And be more intentional about it, as you described. And then the other things are, first, I would suggest you got to recruit from non-traditional sources. Sometimes that takes extra time, and you have to be willing to do that. So fortunately, when I was at Microsoft and I had worked with that corporate vice president, Debbie Dunham, and we had hired those 2,000 sellers, we were really clear about wanting to have good representation of women. And many times that took a lot of time. We were under pressure to hire very quickly and to stand up this organization. But because it was such an important component of what she cared about, what I cared about, what the entire leadership team cared about, it meant sacrificing some of our hiring goal dates to find the right people who had diverse backgrounds. And it also took taking a little bit of time to find them in places you wouldn't have considered. So some of the best hires that I've ever made in sales are people from military, as an example, or people from retail stores as an example. So you don't have to go to previous, people who have previous experiences in technology sales or who have sold similar types of things as you. You should be like the recruiter who recruited me at Microsoft. Look for specific things that show you that somebody has the aptitude and the ability to be able to sell based on whether or not they have a strong track record in whatever it is that it might have been. So whether it's dance as an example, maybe you've never had a sales experience, but dance was something that was really important to you and you were always number one and top of your game, whatever it was for you, sports, whatever. I think just showing a demonstrated track record of success is really important for people who are recruiting sales. And then most importantly, this is the one that I am so passionate about because I think we spend so much time trying to get more diverse candidates in the door. And I applaud the companies who have made progress on that front, IBM included. But there is no point making progress on the front end if you don't have a culture and environment fostered where they can thrive and succeed when they get there. And that is the biggest issue that I see in so many places. We are so focused on how do we increase our diversity numbers? Well, by the way, now they're all leaving actually, because maybe we didn't have mentors for them. We didn't have career development programs. We didn't show them other women or diverse leaders in sales. You can't be it if you can't see it, that type of mentality. So I think all of those things are so important if we really want to move the needle.
I love that. Now, we actually have a live question from our live Facebook audience.
Yeah.
And it's a really good question asked by David Goad. And David says, Rakhi, how important is it for the demographics of your sales team to align with the demographics of your typical buyer, age, gender, culture, etc.? That's a great question. So this is actually a historical moment, actually, Rakhi, because as you know, we started broadcasting Facebook Live to the Modern Selling Podcast while we are doing the live recording. Everybody's listening in. And this is one of our this is actually our very first question from a live audience.
Exciting. I'm honored. Thank you, David Goad, for asking one of our very first questions. So I have strong views on this one. I think, unfortunately, companies actually spend too much time trying to find salespeople who reflect their customer base. And that means you're almost boxed in to what you sell and who you sell to. If you really want to grow market share, if you really want to reach a different audience and target a different audience, why wouldn't you hire people who reflect that? And that's why diversity is so important. So are you a company of white males? I'll say it out loud. And you only want to sell to white males in this day and age? Probably not. You want to sell to anybody who you possibly can. And I think on the client side, the profile has changed so much. I mean, we're selling to 25-year-old CEOs. You're selling to 22-year-old women who started their own companies. So if you don't have people who span across a wide spectrum from a diversity perspective, not just race, but also diversity of background, thought, perspective, industry versus non-industry hires, you're never really going to be able to grow market share and grow your business.
I love what you said, and you are spot on, especially if you're hiring today for your typical buyer. Yeah, the reality is your buyer is changing. All those folks that were in boomer positions are getting less and less and less. And guess what's coming in? A very culturally diverse workforce that has had totally different experiences. So I love what you said. And the reality is doing that hiring to essentially our typical buyer, the demographics, age, gender, especially if it was, if it was all Caucasian male. Well, why would I do that? That just doesn't make any sense for me. More importantly, because it's going to change tomorrow. And therefore, I'm just exasperating the problem that I already know exists, which is no diversity of thought. And so that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So that's good. I'm glad you had a chance to answer that.
But fundamentally, more importantly, it's just the right thing to do. I know that's a very high level thing to say, but it's just, especially with what's going on right now, I think it's so important to give any marginalized group the opportunity to succeed, to learn. And you can't do that if you're only focused on what your current company looks like. And I actually have a friend who recently told me she had a couple of vendors who were trying to pitch their solution to her company. She runs a startup. And she told me the company that she ended up going with, and she said it had nothing to do with the product alone, but it had to do with their leadership team being 100% male. And she said, I just didn't want to support a vendor who didn't have diversity be at the forefront of something that's important to them. And every time I was going to these meetings, it was all these men in suits who were trying to sell to me, and they weren't adapting or changing the way they sold. They were directing most of their content and answers to the male who was in the room, even though she's the CEO. And so I think companies need to be really thoughtful about this too. I mean, if you want to stay competitive, it's just becoming something that is so important to so many buyers, and something that needs to be pretty front and center.
Agree. Absolutely. And, this is interesting because I absolutely have passed up on companies that have asked me to sit on their advisory board. I literally got on the phone to the CEO and said, I'm looking at your website. It's all white male.
Good for you.
So I appreciate that you're looking at a Latino Hispanic individual, primarily because of one, I have a far deep reach into the sales community, which is where you want to have access to. Thank you. But not until you change the demographics of your organization. No, I can't do that because I'm not going to be your token Latin guy.
Well, good for you. We need more people taking a stand in that way.
Yeah, you got to think through that. Now, they did acknowledge that was something that they were working on, and they actually expressed their actual campaign to hire people of color and women. But what I will say is, in their defense, they also pointed out that pretty much in the location that they were at, which was a European-based country, that's pretty much what the demographics looks like. And so I said, fair enough, but you're expanding in the United States, so change it, right? Like, I got you. I get it. I get the reason. I'm with you, but change it. So any case, this has been a fabulous conversation, and we're now at time. So before I let you go, I want to know, what's the best way for people to connect with you? Is it through LinkedIn? Is it Facebook, Instagram, Twitter? What's the best way, Rakhi?
Well, LinkedIn is probably the best way. So you can just search for my name and find me there. Twitter as well. It's just at Rakhi Voria. And then also, we mentioned I write articles for Forbes. So I have the Forbes Business Development Council page where you can see all of the articles that I've written in the past. It's topics around many of the things we discussed today: millennials, diversity in sales. My next article that's coming out next month is about how companies can retain women in sales. Those are some ways to stay connected, and really look forward to engaging with this audience.
We'll make sure that we put your LinkedIn profile, your Twitter profile, and your Forbes column into the show notes of the Modern Selling Podcast page. And when you reach out to Rakhi, it's Rakhi Voria, Voria. When you reach out to her, make sure you say, I heard you on the Modern Selling Podcast. Connect with her. Rakhi, one last question before you go, and that is your all-time favorite movie. What is it?
That's easy. Toy Story.
Toy Story. Which one? Number 1, 2, or 3?
The first one. Now there's a fourth one. No, I think it just has a special place in my heart because it's one of the first movies I remember, and it's also one of the first gifts I remember. So I think it came out either on my 5th or 6th birthday, and my middle sister had gotten it for me, and I think I watched it every day for literally a year. And so I love that movie. I could probably recite it, even though I am not a child anymore.
But that's okay. It's like me and the Little Mermaid. I used to with my little sister. She was 5, and that's all we watched. And so now every time I hear something related to Little Mermaid, I can recite the words. I can sing the song. Yes, I can sing. Look at this stuff. Isn't it neat?
I love it. Well, it's funny because Toy Story 4 actually just came out last summer, and there had been 10 years since Toy Story 3 and Toy Story 4. So I'm like there on opening night, elbowing my way in. Move, kids. I've been waiting a decade for this.
I love it. Well, there you have it. Toy Story it is. And so for all of you listening in right now, make sure you connect with Rakhi. Tell her you heard her on the Modern Selling Podcast. And everybody listening in right now, don't turn that down because we got a very important message for you right now. And Facebook, thanks so much for joining with us. We super appreciate it. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Modern Selling Podcast. Please do me a huge favor and give the Modern Selling Podcast a rating and review on iTunes. I would appreciate it. Also, if you want to easily find our show, just go to themodernsellingpodcast.com. Hey, since you'll be on our site, be sure to check out our Modern Marketing Engine podcast hosted by my co-founder and CMO, Bernie Borges. Thanks for listening in, and until the next episode, good selling.